She pulled the ring off her finger and set it on his desk without a single word, no tears, no trembling, no last desperate look at the door. 3 years. 3 years of cooking his favorite meals, fixing his broken ledgers, smiling at his guests while he looked through her like glass. 3 years of being the woman he settled for because the woman he wanted was dead. Tonight she watched him smile at Clara Beaumont, the real smile, the one he had never once given her, and something Amelia Whitaker went perfectly, permanently still. If this story reaches somewhere deep inside you, subscribe and follow Amelia all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The ring hit the center of his desk at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and the sound it made, small, clean, final, was the quietest thing Amelia Whitaker had ever done in 3 years of marriage. She did not slam it. She did not throw it. She set it down with the careful deliberateness of a woman who had made a decision she intended to keep, and then she stood there for exactly 3 seconds looking at it, this gold band that had been sized for her dead sister's finger and adjusted imperfectly for hers, and then she turned and walked out of the study without looking back. The party was still going in the ballroom below. She could hear the music. She could hear him laughing. 4 hours earlier, Amelia had been standing beside the fireplace in the Caldwell ballroom with a glass of lemonade she hadn't touched and the particular expression she had spent 3 years perfecting: serene, pleasant, unreadable. She had worn that expression to 70-some dinners, 14 formal gatherings, 6 county events, and 1 wedding anniversary celebration that Nathaniel had forgotten until Thomas reminded him at breakfast that morning. She had it down to a science: eyes soft, chin level, slight upward curve at the corners of the mouth. The expression of a woman who was perfectly content. She was not perfectly content. She was watching her husband dance with Clara Beaumont. Not the obligatory host's dance, not the polite, correct, arm's-length rotation that etiquette demanded of a married man at his own gathering. This was something else entirely. His hand sat low on Clara's back. His head was tilted toward hers. And his face, the face that Amelia had spent 3 years trying to reach, the face that met her at breakfast with careful neutrality, and received her conversation with polite, distant acknowledgement, that face was open. Warm, lit from inside with something unguarded and genuine. He was smiling, not the controlled professional smile she knew. The real one, the one she had never earned. She's always had a gift for drawing people in, hasn't she? Amelia turned. Margaret Holloway had materialized at her elbow with the timing of a woman who collects other people's worst moments like they were pressed flowers. She was smiling with all her teeth showing, her eyes fixed on the dancing couple with bright, practiced admiration. "Clara's lovely," Amelia said. Her voice came out exactly as she intended, smooth, mild, giving nothing away. "Oh, she truly is. And she and Nathaniel have always had that connection. You know, the kind that just exists between certain people. Almost like it's written somewhere." Margaret tilted her head, the picture of sympathetic observation. "It must be a particular kind of challenge, coming into a house with so much history already in it. Not every woman could manage it as graciously as you have." Amelia looked at her. She had heard versions of this exact speech at least a dozen times in 3 years, from at least a dozen women who all used the same tone, that honeyed, sorrowful admiration that translated, without any loss of meaning, to "we all know you're second. We all see it. Isn't it remarkable how well you pretend otherwise?" "I manage just fine," Amelia said pleasantly, "if you'll excuse me." She moved away through the crowd before Margaret could load another arrow. She was crossing toward the far side of the room when she heard a snippet of conversation from 2 gentlemen standing near the drinks table, their backs to her, their voices carrying with the carelessness of men who were not accustomed to monitoring what they said. Generous of Caldwell to honor the arrangement, under the circumstances. Not every man would. Well, what choice did he have? Contract was signed. The families expected it. A brief pause, a low sound that might have been a chuckle. Still, marrying the younger one after must be a daily reminder of what he actually lost. Does she know, do you think, that she was the consolation? She'd have to be blind not to. Amelia stopped walking. She stood perfectly still in the middle of the Caldwell ballroom, with those words moving through her like cold water, not because they were new, not because they contained any information she hadn't already known in some form, but because hearing it spoken aloud in that casual, indifferent way, consolation, not even worth lowering their voices, stripped away the last of the careful story she had been telling herself. She had known she was a replacement. She had not let herself know that everyone else knew it too. That it was simply a fact of her life that people discussed at parties in passing, without particular concern for whether she was within earshot. She set her untouched glass of lemonade down on the nearest surface. She turned and looked across the ballroom at Nathaniel, still dancing, still smiling, still wholly absorbed in a conversation with Clara Beaumont that clearly required his complete and undivided attention. He did not look for her once, and that not Margaret Holloway's needling, not the whispered conversation at the drinks table, but that simple, ordinary fact was the thing that finally did it. 3 years she had spent arranging herself in his peripheral vision, making herself available, making herself useful, making herself impossible to overlook. And he had overlooked her anyway, not with cruelty, not with intention, simply with the effortless ease of a man who had never once needed to try. She thought of the morning 6 months ago when she had come to his study with the corrected household accounts, and he had taken them from her with a distracted thank you and gone back to his correspondence without looking up. She had stood there for 30 seconds, waiting for something she wasn't even sure what. Some acknowledgement, some small sign that he understood what she was handing him, that she had found and fixed a mistake that had been costing the estate money for 2 years. He had not looked up. She thought of the dinner last spring when she had spent 2 days preparing his favorite meal because she had overheard him mention it to Thomas in passing, and he had eaten it without comment. And later she had heard him tell a guest that cook was getting better. She thought of the night 3 months ago when she had stayed up until 2 in the morning, finishing alterations to his correspondence before a critical business meeting. And he had arrived home from that meeting and gone straight to his study, and she had not seen him until breakfast, when he had said good morning with the same mild courtesy he extended to every person in his household. The consolation. She walked to the study. The ring was cold when she pulled it off. It had always been slightly wrong on her finger, sized for Helena's narrower hand, adjusted by a jeweler who had done his best but not quite solved the problem, so that it sat just a fraction too loose. A permanent small reminder that it had not been made for her. She had never mentioned this to anyone. She had simply worn it and not mentioned it, because mentioning it would have required acknowledging something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She was ready now. She set it on the center of his desk. Precisely centered, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she left. Nathaniel found it at 6 the next morning. He came to his study in the gray early light, intending to review the quarterly accounts, pushed open the door, crossed to his desk, and stopped. His hand hovered over the ring for a moment without touching it. Then he picked it up slowly, the way a man picks up something he doesn't entirely understand, and stood there turning it over in his fingers. Thomas appeared in the doorway with the punctual unhelpfulness of a man who had excellent timing for witnessing things he would rather not witness. "Morning, sir. Shall I?" He stopped. His eyes went to Nathaniel's hand, to the ring. His expression became very carefully neutral. "Where is Mrs. Caldwell?" Nathaniel asked. "Kitchen, sir. Spoke with cook about the morning arrangements." Thomas paused in the way that he paused when he was selecting words with surgical precision. "She seemed well, in good spirits, actually." Nathaniel looked up at him. "In good spirits?" "Yes, sir." There was something in Thomas's careful delivery of that phrase that landed with a particular weight. Nathaniel had known Thomas for 15 years. Thomas did not choose his words carefully without reason. "Thank you," Nathaniel said. "That'll be all." Thomas withdrew. Nathaniel stood alone in the study with the ring in his closed fist and the very uncomfortable awareness that he had somehow, without quite noticing when, made a serious mistake. He found her in the east garden an hour later. She was sitting on the stone bench near the herb garden, not reading, not working, simply sitting with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned toward the morning light. She heard his footsteps and turned, and her expression was entirely composed. "Good morning," she said, as if this were any ordinary day. "Amelia," he held up the ring. She looked at it. She did not reach for it. "I found this on my desk. I know," she said. "I'd like an explanation." She studied him with those dark, steady eyes that he had, he realized, persistently misread as simple, as uncomplicated. He understood now, with a clarity that came slightly too late, that there was nothing uncomplicated about Amelia Whitaker. There never had been. "I think it's fairly self-explanatory," she said. "Amelia, don't." The word was quiet, but it stopped him cleanly. "Don't say my name like that. Like I'm being unreasonable. I have been the most reasonable person in this marriage for 3 years, and I am finished with it." He said nothing. "I am not leaving," she continued. "I have nowhere to go, and I am not a fool. I will continue managing this household because I am good at it, and it matters to me that it's done correctly. But I am done performing the role of the patient, grateful wife who doesn't notice that her husband has never once chosen her." She met his eyes directly. "You have treated me like a responsibility, Nathaniel. Like something you inherited that you didn't want, but couldn't in good conscience throw away. I understand why I understood it when I married you, and I chose to come anyway because I believed that kindness could become something more. I was wrong, and I am done paying for that mistake." Something moved in his face, a flicker of something she couldn't name, and he clearly wasn't prepared to examine. "I have tried to be," he began. "Respectful," she said. "Financially generous, never cruel." A brief, precise pause. "Never present, either. But I suppose 2 out of 3 is more than some women get." She picked up her things. "Amelia." His voice had a quality she had never heard in it. Uncertain. Almost urgent. What do you intend to do?" She looked at him over her shoulder. "I intend," she said clearly, "to stop waiting for you to see me. And start living as if I don't need you to." She walked back toward the house. He stood in the east garden for a long time after she disappeared inside, her ring in his hand, watching the place where she had been. And for the first time since the marriage began, Nathaniel Caldwell felt the specific unpleasant chill of a man who has been telling himself a comfortable story and has just run out of reasons to keep believing it. The days that followed rearranged everything without moving anything. Amelia was still there. She managed the household with the same quiet precision she always had. She greeted him at meals with pleasant composure. She answered when he spoke to her directly, intelligently, without any of the careful hedging she had once employed. She was, by every observable measure, exactly as she had always been. Except that she had stopped watching for him. He had not known until it was gone how much of his daily life had been quietly organized around that fact. The meals that appeared at exactly the right moment. The correspondence that was sorted before he asked. The way she had always seemed to know, without being told, when he needed something. He had not appreciated it, had barely registered it, the way a man doesn't register the particular quality of light in a room until someone extinguishes it. The light was out. He passed her room 3 nights after their conversation in the garden and heard laughter through the door, hers, and a housemaid's. Genuine and unguarded and completely at ease. And he stood in the hallway for a moment he would not have admitted to anyone, arrested by the simple strangeness of hearing his wife laugh, as if she had forgotten to be careful about it. He had never heard her laugh like that before. He kept walking. He told himself it didn't mean anything. He was less and less convinced. 3 weeks after the ring appeared on his desk, Amelia spread estate survey maps across the dining table at dinner without asking permission. With the easy authority of a woman who had simply decided that asking permission was no longer something she did. The northern tenant properties, she said, not looking up. 4 years without an assessment. The official reports don't reflect actual conditions. I've been verifying directly. I've spoken with 11 families in the past month. Nathaniel set down his fork. You've been riding out to the northern quarter. Yes. She still didn't look up regularly since March. The wells in that section are contaminated. That's the source of the illness last summer, not bad luck or bad constitutions. 3 families have roofing on the verge of collapse. The farming equipment provided by the estate is 2 decades old and half of it is broken beyond use. She looked up then, and her eyes were steady and direct. None of this is in the formal reports, Nathaniel. Someone has been falsifying the assessments for years. I believe it's Garrett. I have 8 months of documentation. The room went quiet. 8 months, he said slowly. I wanted to be certain before I said anything. Also a brief pause, a quality in her voice that was neither cruel nor gentle, simply honest. You weren't particularly inclined to listen to me 8 months ago. He looked at the survey. He looked at the notes she had made in the margins, precise, thorough, clearly the work of someone who had spent serious, sustained attention on a problem she cared about solving. He looked at his wife, who had been quietly investigating corruption on his estate for 8 months, documenting it methodically, building a case with the patience and rigor of someone who knew what she was doing, and saying nothing until she was certain. You wrote to the county magistrate, he said, reading a line in her notes. Last week, I should have a response within 10 days. She met his eyes. These are your people, Nathaniel. They've been failed. I thought someone should do something about it. He held her gaze. Show me everything you have, he said. They sat at that table for 3 hours. She showed him. He asked questions and she answered them clearly, specifically, without softening or simplifying. She talked to him the way he had heard her talk to Thomas, to the tenant farmers, to Cook as an equal, as someone who expected to be taken seriously, as a woman who had stopped performing accessibility and was simply finally herself. He could not find a single error in her work. You're better at this than Garrett, he said when they finished, meaning it as a simple observation. She looked at him. I know, she said, and gathered her papers and went to bed. Nathaniel sat alone at the dining table in the candlelight after she had gone, and felt something shift in him, quiet and tectonic, and entirely unwelcome, the specific vertigo of a man who has organized his entire life around a fixed point and has just discovered that the fixed point was wrong. He had spent 3 years looking through a window at a memory. He had not noticed until now that the most remarkable person in his house had been standing right behind him the entire time. The response from the county magistrate's office arrived on a Thursday morning, and it was worse than Amelia had expected. She read it twice standing at the hallway table, then folded it precisely along its original crease and walked directly to Nathaniel's study without knocking. He was at his desk when she pushed the door open. He looked up and something in her expression made him set down his pen without being asked. The magistrate's office has records of 3 formal complaints filed against the Caldwell Northern properties in the last 4 years, she said, crossing the room and placing the letter in front of him. 2 from tenant families regarding unsafe housing conditions. 1 from a farming collective regarding contaminated water. All 3 were logged, assigned to a reviewing officer, and then quietly closed without investigation. She tapped the letter. The reviewing officer on all 3 cases was the same man. A clerk named Silas Pruitt, Garrett's brother-in-law. Nathaniel read the letter. He read it again. This is a conspiracy, he said. Yes, Amelia said. It has been for at least 5 years. He looked up at her. There was something in his face that she had not seen there before, not the careful, controlled composure she knew, not the polished distance he wore in company. This was the face of a man who was genuinely angry, and beneath that, genuinely ashamed. My tenants filed complaints, he said slowly, against conditions on my land. And I never knew. You weren't meant to know. That is not an excuse. His voice was quiet and hard. I should have known. I should have been paying attention. He set the letter down. How long before we can move on, Garrett? I need one more piece of documentation, the original falsified assessments, compared against the actual conditions I've recorded. I can have that ready within the week. She paused. But Nathaniel, if we move on Garrett through the county magistrate's office, we run directly into Pruitt. He will bury it again. Then we go over Pruitt. The circuit court convenes in Richmond in 6 weeks. I've already written to Judge Harlan's clerk. She met his eyes. I took the liberty. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not quite what she would call admiration, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, perhaps. The specific look of a man seeing something clearly for the first time that had always been directly in front of him. You took the liberty 6 weeks ago, he said. I took the liberty, she said evenly, when I understood that waiting for someone else to handle it meant it would not get handled. She picked up her copies of the documentation from the corner of his desk where she'd set them. I'll have the final comparison ready by Friday. She turned to go. Amelia, she stopped. Did not turn immediately. Thank you, he said. And she could hear in those 2 words that he meant something larger than the documents, larger than the investigation that he was gesturing toward, something he did not yet have the vocabulary to name directly. She turned enough to look at him over her shoulder. Don't thank me, she said quietly. Pay your tenants what you owe them. She left him with that. Word traveled the way it always did in a county of this size, slowly at first, then all at once. By the end of that week, 3 of the tenant farmers from the northern quarter had heard, through the particular invisible network by which news moved among working people, that Mrs. Caldwell had been to the magistrate's office, that she had documentation. That she was not, despite what some people had assumed, simply a decorative addition to the Caldwell household. A woman named Ruth Adkins appeared at the estate's back kitchen door on a Friday afternoon, hat in hand, boots worn through at the toe. She was somewhere between 40 and 60. Hardship had blurred the distance, and she stood in the doorway with the particular posture of someone who was accustomed to being turned away, but had decided to try anyway. I was told Mrs. Caldwell sometimes has time to speak with people, she said to Cook, who looked at her for a moment, and then simply said, Wait here, and went to find Amelia. Amelia came to the kitchen and looked at Ruth Adkins standing in the doorway, the worn boots, the careful posture, the dignity that poverty had not managed to strip from her, and said, Come in, ma'am. Sit down. Tell me what you need. Ruth sat, she told her. Her husband had been one of the men who filed the original complaint 4 years ago about the contaminated well. After the complaint was closed without action, their landlord Garrett, acting as the estate's agent, had quietly increased their rent. Not by enough to be obviously punitive, just enough to make things harder. Just enough to make the point. My husband stopped talking about the water after that, Ruth said. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. Said it wasn't worth the trouble. Said we just had to manage. She paused. He died last winter. Liver sickness, doctor said it was the water. The kitchen went absolutely silent. Amelia sat across from Ruth Adkins and held that silence, for a moment held it properly, the way the woman deserved, without rushing past it to the practical things. Then she said, I am going to need you to tell me everything. Every date you can remember, every conversation, everything your husband said and did and was told. She placed her hand briefly on the older woman's folded hands. Will you do that? Ruth looked at her with eyes that had been waiting a long time to be taken seriously. Yes, ma'am, she said, I will. They sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours. When Ruth Adkins left, she walked differently than she had arrived. Amelia added Ruth's testimony to her documentation that evening, writing late into the night in the small sitting room off her bedroom. The one Nathaniel had originally designated as a dressing room, and that she had quietly converted into a workspace 18 months ago because she needed somewhere to think, and the rest of the house did not offer enough quiet. She wrote carefully, methodically, the way she did everything, building the record piece by piece, making sure each element connected to the next, making sure the whole thing told a story that no one could dismiss. A knock at the sitting room door made her look up. It was Nathaniel. He stood in the doorway with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled, which was not how he typically presented himself outside his own study. And he had an expression that she had begun to recognize over the past weeks, the look of a man who had something to say and was working out how to say it without sounding like a fool. "It's past midnight," he said. "I'm aware." He looked at the paper spread across her work table. He looked at the lamp she'd pulled close. He looked at the ink stains on her right hand. "May I come in?" he asked. The question surprised her enough that she answered honestly. Yes. He crossed the room and stood at the edge of her work table, not touching anything, just looking at the scope of what was laid out: the documentation, the testimony, the letter from the magistrate, the notes she had made cross-referencing dates and figures. "Ruth Adkins came today," Amelia said, without looking up from what she was writing. "Her husband filed the original complaint 4 years ago. Garrett retaliated by raising their rent. Her husband died last winter from liver disease." A pause. "The well water." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "She'll testify?" he said. "Yes. And she knows 2 other families who will as well." Amelia set down her pen. "This is bigger than Garrett and Pruitt, Nathaniel. This has been running long enough and consistently enough that I think someone above Pruitt was aware of it. Possibly for a very long time." She looked up at him. "This could embarrass some important people." "Good," he said flatly. She studied his face. The anger there was real and clean, not the performative outrage of a man managing his public image, but the specific fury of someone who had discovered that people in his care had been quietly destroyed on his watch without his knowledge. "You should sleep," he said after a moment. "When I finish this section." He pulled the chair from against the wall and sat down across from her. "Not close. Then I'll wait," he said. She looked at him. He picked up one of the survey comparison sheets from the corner of the table and began reading it, and Amelia, who had spent 3 years sitting alone at every task she had ever undertaken in this house, turned back to her writing and said nothing, and tried to identify the strange thing she was feeling. It took her a while to name it. It was company. She had forgotten what it felt like. She finished at 1:30. She set down her pen and flexed her hand, and Nathaniel, without a word, went to the small side table and poured 2 glasses of water from the pitcher and set one in front of her. A small thing, an ordinary thing, the kind of thing that meant nothing and meant everything depending on how long you had gone without it. She wrapped her hands around the glass. "You read everything?" 3 times he sat back down. "The comparison of the official reports versus the actual condition surveys. If we present this at the circuit court, there is no version of events where Garrett walks away from it." "No," she agreed, "there isn't. And Pruitt is more complicated. But Ruth Adkins' testimony connects him directly to the suppression of the original complaint. That's obstruction at minimum." She looked at Nathaniel steadily. "Are you prepared for what this does to the family's public standing? There will be people who say you should have known sooner. There will be people who prefer this stayed quiet." "Let them say it," he said. "Nathaniel, I am not interested in protecting a reputation at the cost of the people on my land." His voice was level, but there was iron underneath it. "Whatever this cost publicly, it is less than what it has already cost them." He paused. "Is that the last objection you have, or are there others I should prepare for?" She considered him. "That's the last one. Then we proceed on Friday as you planned." She nodded. She began gathering the papers into their proper order. "How long?" Nathaniel said. Carefully, "Did you know that I wasn't paying attention?" She stopped organizing the papers. "To the estate," she said. "To anything that mattered." He held her gaze steadily. "To the tenants. To the accounts." He stopped. Restarted to you. The room was very quiet. She thought about lying. Or at least softening it. She thought about the version of herself from 2 years ago, who would have done exactly that, who would have said something gracious and deflecting and unthreatening. Something designed to make the conversation easier for him, rather than more honest. That version of herself had placed a wedding ring on his desk 3 weeks ago. From the beginning, she said. He absorbed that. "I am sorry," he said. Not quickly, not with the easy fluency of a man producing required words. Slowly, like someone laying something down they had been carrying for a while. "I know that is insufficient." "It is," she said, "but it's a start." She finished organizing the papers, stood and looked at him. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said. He rose, a courtesy he had not always extended. She noticed and said, "Good night, Amelia." She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. The circuit court letter confirmed the date 2 days later, and Amelia's next problem arrived the morning after that in the form of Elliot Harrington. She knew who he was before they were introduced. The county had been talking about Elliot Harrington for 6 months, a merchant from Charleston who had come north to expand his trading network, and had, in the process, developed a reputation for dealing fairly with suppliers and clients alike, which in this particular county made him something of an anomaly. She had heard his name. She had not expected him to arrive at the Caldwell estate on a Tuesday morning with a letter of introduction from a mutual business acquaintance and a proposal to discuss a potential commercial partnership. Nathaniel was away on the northern properties when Harrington arrived, inspecting conditions with Thomas in preparation for the court case. So it was Amelia who received him. He was perhaps 35, unremarkable in height, with an intelligent face and the particular quality of attentiveness that Amelia recognized in people who had learned to listen more than they spoke. He accepted the seat she offered and the coffee that was brought, and he looked around the room with the easy, observant gaze of someone taking in information rather than performing comfort. "I understand Mr. Caldwell is away this morning," he said. "He'll return by afternoon. I'm happy to discuss the preliminary terms if you'd like to use the time productively." She settled across from him with a copy of the estate's trading records. "I've managed the commercial accounts for the past 18 months. I'm familiar with the current partnerships and what we're looking for in new ones." He looked at her for a moment, not the uncomfortable up-and-down assessment she had learned to brace for from men who were recalibrating their expectations of what they were dealing with, but a simple, direct recognition. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you're looking for." She told him. They talked for 2 hours, and it was the most straightforwardly useful commercial conversation Amelia had participated in since arriving at the Caldwell estate. He asked intelligent questions. He pushed back on 2 of her proposed terms with reasoning rather than authority. When she countered his pushback with her own reasoning, he listened to the actual content of what she said and adjusted his position accordingly. When Nathaniel returned at 2:30, Amelia and Harrington were finishing a second cup of coffee and had reached a preliminary agreement on 3 of the 5 major terms. Nathaniel came into the room, took in the scene, his wife across from a man he did not recognize, papers between them, the particular quality of ease in the room that indicated a conversation that had been going well, and there was a brief moment, just a fraction of a second, where something crossed his face that Amelia catalogued and filed away. "Mr. Harrington," she said, rising. "My husband, Nathaniel Caldwell." The 2 men shook hands. Nathaniel was pleasant, composed, professional, everything he always was. He sat. He reviewed the preliminary terms. He asked 2 questions, both of which Amelia had already addressed in the preceding conversation, and she answered them again without commentary. "I believe Mrs. Caldwell has done excellent preliminary work here," Harrington said at a natural pause in the conversation. It was said simply, without emphasis, the way someone states a fact they don't anticipate needing to argue for. "The terms she's outlined are fair and the reasoning is sound. I'm satisfied to proceed on this basis if you are." "I'll review the full proposal this evening," Nathaniel said. "We can confirm by end of the week, of course." Harrington rose and extended his hand first to Nathaniel, then turned to Amelia. Mrs. Caldwell. Thank you for a productive morning. Thank you for making it so, she said. He left. The room was quiet for a moment. He seems competent, Nathaniel said, not looking up from the preliminary terms. He is, Amelia said. Fair also. He pushed back on 2 points and had good reasons for both. I'd consider him a reliable partner. She began gathering her copies of the papers. The full proposal is organized on the left side of the file. Your notes are on the right, Amelia. She looked up. Nathaniel had the particular expression of a man attempting to say something he had not planned to say and was trying to determine whether he should proceed. He spoke to you, Nathaniel said, as though I was a person conducting a business conversation, she offered. A pause. Yes, people tend to do that, she said carefully, when they are spoken to first as a person conducting a business conversation. He looked at her directly. She looked back. She was not going to make this easier for him. She had decided that some time ago that whatever understanding he was slowly, painfully arriving at, he needed to arrive at it himself, without her smoothing the path. She had spent 3 years smoothing paths. She was done. I will review the proposal tonight, he said finally. Good, she said and left the room. 3 days after Harrington's visit, Margaret Holloway came to call. Margaret Holloway always came to call when something interesting was happening in the county, which was to say Margaret Holloway came to call constantly and always appeared to have simply been passing by. She sat in Amelia's front parlor with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes very bright and alert, and she made the kind of conversation that was entirely about gathering information, while appearing to be entirely about sharing it. I hear you've been riding out to the northern quarter regularly, Margaret said, with the particular tone of someone who has heard considerably more than that one fact and is testing to see which version you'll give. Yes, Amelia said pleasantly. I have, and calling on the tenant families. Yes, that's very dedicated of you. Margaret tilted her head. Some people think it's an unusual approach for a wife. Some people think a great many things are unusual, Amelia said and smiled. Margaret shifted, and the young Mr. Harrington was here recently, I understand. For business. Yes, the preliminary terms look favorable. He's quite well regarded, Margaret said carefully. Quite successful, and I believe quite unattached. She paused with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. It must be pleasant to have someone new to speak with. Amelia looked at her. She thought about the version of herself who would have flushed and deflected and rushed to demonstrate her own propriety. She thought about how exhausting that version had been. She thought about Ruth Adkins sitting in the kitchen with her worn boots and her folded hands and her husband who was dead. Margaret, she said, with perfect pleasantness, I think you should go. Margaret blinked. I beg your pardon? I think Amelia said again, still smiling, that you should go. I have work to do, and I don't think this conversation is going where either of us wants it to, and we'll both be happier if we stop before it arrives. Margaret stood. Her expression cycled quickly through offense, recalibration, and a very grudging species of respect. Well, she said. Good day, Amelia said warmly. Margaret went. Cook, who had been moving through the hallway within earshot and had clearly heard the entire exchange, appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea and an expression of profound satisfaction. I'll take that, Amelia said, reaching for one of the cups. Thank you, Ellen. My pleasure, ma'am. Cook set the second cup down and turned to leave, then paused. Mrs. Caldwell. Yes, for what it's worth. Cook looked at her steadily. The whole house noticed. When you stop trying so hard. The whole house noticed, and the whole house is. She seemed to search for the precise word. Glad, she said finally. Just glad she left. Amelia sat with her tea and that word, glad, and tried to remember the last time the simple fact of someone being glad on her behalf had mattered this much. The formal complaint to the circuit court was filed the following Friday, and by Saturday noon it was the only thing anyone in the county was discussing. Garrett received his notice of suspension from estate duties that morning, delivered by Thomas with the particular correctness of a man who has been waiting a long time to deliver a particular piece of news. Garrett's response, which was reported back to Amelia by one of the stable hands who had been unfortunate enough to be nearby, involved a great deal of volume and several accusations about who was actually responsible for the complaint and what she thought she was doing interfering in matters that were not her concern. The stable hand relaying this was clearly trying to be diplomatic. "What exactly did he say?" Amelia asked. The stable hand hesitated. "He said, ma'am, that it wasn't your place, that this was between men of business and that you'd gone and stuck your nose where well. He was rather specific about where he felt your nose did not belong." "I see," Amelia said. "And then he said some things about Mr. Caldwell, which I won't repeat because they weren't fit." "I appreciate that." She thought for a moment. "Thank you, James." "That's all." James left. Amelia sat with her tea cooling in her hands and thought about Garrett and his brother-in-law and the three families who had filed complaints 4 years ago and been made to pay for the audacity of asking for what they were owed. She thought about Ruth Adkins' husband, dead of contaminated water at 51. She was still sitting there when Nathaniel came in. He had been with Thomas when the notice was delivered and had heard Garrett's response firsthand. His expression when he walked in told her enough. "He threatened to challenge the filing," Nathaniel said, "on the grounds that you weren't authorized to act on behalf of the estate." "I anticipated that," Amelia said. She reached into the folder at her elbow and produced a document. "Which is why I had you sign the authorization for the circuit court correspondence 3 weeks ago. You may remember it as the third document in the stack I brought you on a Thursday morning. You signed it without reading it in detail." He took the document. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You planned for this," he said. "I planned for several things," she said. Garrett's response was not a surprise. Men who have been profiting from other people's suffering for 5 years rarely accept accountability with grace. "He's threatening you," specifically, Nathaniel said, and the quality of his voice had changed. She looked up at him. "He told Thomas," Nathaniel said, each word careful and deliberate, "that you had gone out of your way to destroy a good man's livelihood, and that consequences for that kind of behavior had a way of finding women who forgot their station." The room was very still. Set down her cup. "That," she said, "is called a threat." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "It is." Something moved between them, a specific electricity that had not been in the room before, a new kind of tension, charged differently than anything she had felt in 3 years of living in this house. He was not going to look away from this. She could see it in the set of his jaw, in the particular stillness of someone who has located the precise boundary of what they will tolerate. "Nathaniel," she said carefully, "I am going to handle this," he said. "Flat absolute. I know you are," she said, "but listen to me first." She held his gaze. "If you go after Garrett personally, right now, before the court date, you give him ammunition to paint this as a personal vendetta rather than a legal matter. You give his lawyers something to work with. You potentially compromise the entire case." A pause. "I need you to trust that I have built this well enough that he cannot win. I need you to let the law do it instead of you." He looked at her for a long time. "He threatened you," he said again, as if she might have missed it. "I know," she said. "I intend to include it in the court record. It's called evidence." Something passed through his expression, frustration, and underneath it, something she had not expected. Something that looked stripped of everything else, like fear. Not the fear of losing a case. The fear of a man who has only recently understood the value of what he's been careless with and is confronted for the first time with the possibility that someone else might take it from him. She saw it. She chose for now not to name it. "Trust me," she said quietly. "I've been building this for 8 months. Let me finish it." A long beat. His jaw worked once. Then he said, "All right." "Thank you," she said. She turned back to her papers. He stayed in the room, not saying anything, just there. The same way he had been in her sitting room at midnight, present and quiet, and she had thought the word company like she was learning it for the first time. She let him stay. She was starting, very cautiously, to think that this might be the most honest thing between them, yet not declarations, not grand gestures, but this, him sitting across from her while she worked, trusting her to know what she was doing, and her letting him stay because she had decided, carefully and with clear eyes, that it was worth finding out whether this man was capable of being something more than the thing he had been. Outside, the county was talking. Inside, Amelia Whittaker kept building her case, piece by careful piece, and Nathaniel Caldwell sat across from her and finally, for the first time in 3 years, paid attention. The circuit court date was set for the third Tuesday of November, and in the 2 weeks between the filing and the hearing, the county turned on itself the way small places do when something buried gets pulled into the light. Garrett did not go quietly. Amelia had expected that. What she had not entirely anticipated was the speed and the particular viciousness of it, the way a man with nothing left to lose and a great deal to hide could weaponize a community's appetite for scandal. Within 4 days of the filing, there were stories circulating in town. Not about the falsified reports, not about the contaminated wells or the families who had been paying inflated rents for the privilege of living in collapsing houses. The stories were about Amelia. She heard the first one from Polly, who came to her sitting room on a Wednesday morning with the expression of someone delivering news they would rather not deliver. "I heard something in town yesterday, ma'am. When I was at the dry goods store." Polly twisted her hands together. "Mrs. Garrett, she was talking to 2 other women, and she didn't see me come in. She was saying that you only filed the complaint because you're jealous. That you're trying to destroy her husband because he reported to Mr. Caldwell about Mr. Harrington." Amelia set down her pen. "About Mr. Harrington. Yes, ma'am. She was saying that Garrett saw something. She was very vague about what exactly, and that you're trying to silence him before he can tell Mr. Caldwell." Polly looked at her directly. "It's not true, ma'am. Anyone who knows anything knows it's not true. But people are listening." "People always listen to the interesting version," Amelia said. She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for telling me, Polly. That took courage. Is there anything I should do?" "No," Amelia said. "Go about your day normally. Don't argue with anyone who repeats it. That only makes it louder." She picked up her pen again. "I'll handle it." Polly left. Amelia sat for exactly 1 minute, which was how long she allowed herself before she folded the new information into her understanding of the situation and moved forward. Garrett was not fighting a legal case anymore. He was fighting a character case. He was going to try to make the circuit court about who Amelia Whittaker was rather than what he had done, and he had found the one angle most likely to work in a county where a married woman's reputation was its own kind of currency. She had anticipated something like this. She pulled open the bottom drawer of her work table and removed a sealed envelope she had prepared 3 weeks ago. Then she went to find Nathaniel. He was in his study with Thomas, reviewing the suspension of Garrett's estate duties and the transition of his responsibilities. He looked up when she came in, read her face in the way he had begun to do over the past weeks, quickly, accurately, with the attention of someone who had decided to start paying attention, and said to Thomas, "Give us a moment." Thomas left. Amelia placed the sealed envelope on his desk. "Garrett's wife is in town telling people I filed the complaint to silence her husband because he witnessed something between me and Harrington. She said it plainly, without drama, watching his face. It's a fabrication. There was nothing to witness. But it's the kind of story that spreads faster than facts." Nathaniel looked at the envelope. "What's in this?" "A letter I wrote 3 weeks ago, notarized and sealed, documenting the exact nature of my business interactions with Harrington, the dates, the witnesses present, and the preliminary commercial terms discussed. I had Thomas and Cook sign as witnesses to the fact that every meeting occurred in the main parlor in plain sight of the household." She paused. I prepared it because I knew Garrett would look for something to use against the filing, and I knew the most available thing was me. He stared at the envelope for a long moment. You knew he would come after you, Nathaniel said slowly. Weeks ago. You knew and you prepared for it and you didn't tell me. I didn't want to alarm you before I had to. He stopped. He pressed one hand flat against his desk and looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something between astonishment and a particular quality of emotion that he was visibly trying to keep contained. Amelia, someone threatening you is precisely the kind of thing I should be alarmed about immediately. You would have reacted, she said simply, and reacting early would have given Garrett warning to adjust his approach. I needed him to commit to this strategy before we responded to it. The silence stretched. You used his threat as a tactical element, Nathaniel said. Yes, by preparing evidence against it in advance. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. That is, he said carefully, one of the most coldly effective things I have ever seen. Thank you, she said. It was not entirely a compliment. I know, she said, but I'm taking it as one anyway. Something happened at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, but was close enough to matter. What do you need from me, he said. I need you to take that envelope to Judge Harlan's clerk today, in person, and file it as a preemptive addendum to our court submission. That puts it in the official record before Garrett can introduce his version. She held his gaze. And I need you to go to town. Yes, I need you to be seen. To speak to people. To make it clear without saying it directly that you stand behind this filing and behind me. She paused. You don't need to declare anything. You just need to be present in the way that powerful men are present, when they want something understood. He held her gaze for a long measured beat. And if someone says something to me directly about Harrington? He asked. Then you tell them the truth, she said steadily. That Harrington came to discuss commercial terms, that I conducted those discussions as estate manager, and that the terms were favorable. A pause. That is the quietly. It is. He picked up the envelope, stood, reached for his coat. He was halfway to the door when he stopped. Amelia, he said without turning. I want you to know whatever anyone in this county is saying. I know who you are. I know what you've done here. And I am not. He stopped again. When he spoke, his voice was lower and more deliberate, like a man reading something he has written and rewritten until he got it right. I am not confused about what kind of woman my wife is. He left before she could respond. She stood in his study alone and looked at the door he had closed behind him, and felt something shift in the careful architecture she had built around her heart over the past weeks, not collapsing exactly, but adjusting. The way a structure adjusts when the load it was built to resist begins unexpectedly to lift. She gave herself exactly 30 seconds. Then she went back to work. Nathaniel went to town. He did it the way he did everything, without performance, without announcement, with the quiet authority of a man who did not need to raise his voice to be heard. He stopped at the land registry office to file the addendum. He spoke to 3 of the county's most prominent businessmen, men whose opinions formed the bedrock beneath everyone else's. He did not argue, he did not defend. He simply discussed the upcoming circuit court hearing with the composed certainty of someone who knows what the outcome will be, and left each conversation having communicated, without a single direct statement, exactly what he intended. By noon, the version of the story that featured Amelia as a jealous, scheming wife had acquired a significant structural problem. Nathaniel Caldwell did not behave like a man whose wife was under suspicion. He behaved like a man whose confidence in his wife was so complete that the suggestion was not worth the energy of a response. He came back at 2:30 and found Amelia in the kitchen with Ruth Adkins and 2 other tenant wives, going over testimony. He stood in the doorway for a moment, unseen. Amelia was sitting at the head of the table, the same kitchen table, where she had sat with Cook and with Polly, and with every member of the household who had ever needed something from her, and she was asking questions in that direct, careful way she had, listening to the answers with complete attention, making notes without interrupting, drawing out details that the women had not realized were significant. Ruth Adkins was talking about her husband's final months. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. Amelia reached across the table and put her hand over Ruth's without stopping the conversation, without making it theatrical, just a hand over another hand, steady and warm, and Ruth's voice evened out. Thomas appeared beside Nathaniel in the doorway, quiet as always. "She's been doing this since you left, sir," Thomas said, very low. "Every week for 3 months. Different families, same table." He paused with the particular quality he had when he believed something needed to be said, and had been waiting for the right moment. "The Northern Quarter families, sir. They don't talk about Mr. Caldwell's estate anymore. They talk about Mrs. Caldwell's estate." He paused again. "I thought you should know." Nathaniel said nothing. He watched his wife hold a grieving woman's hand and prepare to take her testimony to a circuit court, and thought about 3 years of looking through her like glass, and felt the full weight of it for the first time, without the defense of not understanding what he was missing. He had known what he was missing. He had simply chosen not to look. He turned and walked back to his study because there was nothing useful he could do in that doorway, and sitting with his own reckoning was not something he could manage while she was in the same room. The night before the circuit court hearing, Amelia could not sleep. She lay in the dark, going through the documentation sequence in her mind, the falsified reports, the testimony, the notarized letter, the contamination records, Ruth Adkins' account, the trail of dates and figures and names that she had spent 8 months building into a structure no one could reasonably dismantle. She had checked it 11 times. She knew it was sound. She also knew that sound cases lost on presentation, on persuasion, on the particular quality of conviction that made a courtroom believe in what it was hearing. She had never spoken before a circuit court. She had never spoken before any official body of any kind. At 2 in the morning she gave up on sleep and went to her sitting room, and was not surprised to find a line of light under the study door at the end of the hall. She stood outside it for a moment, then knocked once and opened the door. Nathaniel looked up from his desk. He had the documents spread in front of him, her documents, her 8 months of work. His jacket was off. He looked like a man who had also given up on sleep and had found better uses for the hours. "I've read through everything twice more," he said without preamble. "The case is solid, every link holds." "I know," she said. "Then why are you awake?" She sat down in the chair across from him. "Because knowing something is solid is different from standing in front of a room and making people believe it." He was quiet for a moment. "Have you spoken publicly before?" "No, I have," he said. "Business hearings, county disputes." 3 times before a magistrate. He leaned forward. "The case wins or loses before you say the first word. It wins or loses in how you walk through the door. Whether you look like someone who expects to be believed." She looked at him. "And if you don't feel like someone who expects to be believed, you decide to feel it anyway," he said. "You choose the posture before the feeling catches up." He held her gaze. "You have walked into every room in this county for 3 years, looking like you expected to be overlooked. Starting tomorrow, you walk in like you expect to be heard." "Is that what you do?" she asked. "Every time," he said. "Without exception." She thought about that. "You'll be there," she said. It was not a question, but it had the shape of one underneath. "I will be there," he said, in the front row. "And every person in that courtroom will know exactly what that means." She let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding. "All right," she said. "Go to sleep, Amelia. You should do the same." "I will in a little while." He looked back down at the documents. "I want to make sure I know this as well as you do." She stood. At the door she paused. "Nathaniel." He looked up. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I did this because it was right. Not to prove anything to you. Not to earn anything. Because those families deserved someone who would." "I know," he said. And the way he said it simply, without qualification told her that he meant something that was also an apology, also a recognition, also a promise he hadn't yet found words for. She went to bed, she slept. The circuit court convened at 9 in the morning, and the room was full before 8:30. This was the first surprise. Amelia had expected a routine county hearing, a handful of witnesses, the relevant legal parties, a magistrate's gallery with a sparse audience of the professionally curious. What she found when she arrived was a room packed with people she recognized. Tenant farmers from the northern quarter in their best clothes, sitting straight-backed in the gallery rows. Shopkeepers from town, 3 of the county's prominent businessmen who had spoken with Nathaniel 2 weeks ago. Cook in the back row next to Polly and James, the stable hand. Ruth Adkins sat in the front row of the gallery with her hands folded in her lap, wearing a dress that someone had clearly pressed carefully for the occasion. Nathaniel sat directly behind the petitioner's table. Amelia took her seat. She placed her documentation in the precise order she had rehearsed, straightened it once, and then did not touch it again. Garrett's lawyer, a man named Fitch from Richmond, expensive and visibly confident, looked at her across the room with the particular expression of a man who has won cases against women before and is not especially worried about this one. She looked back at him steadily. Judge Harlan entered at exactly 9. The room stood, then settled. "Before we proceed," Harlan said, arranging his papers, "I'll note for the record that this hearing has received a preemptive addendum from the petitioner, filed and notarized, which I have reviewed and entered into evidence." He looked up briefly. "We'll proceed with the petitioner's opening presentation." Amelia stood. She had chosen exactly what Nathaniel told her to choose, the posture before the feeling. She stood with her shoulders back and her notes in her hand, and she looked at the judge and at the gallery, and then she began to speak. She did not speak loudly. She did not perform. She told the story the same way she had built it, chronologically, specifically, with each piece of evidence named and placed in its proper sequence. She spoke for 22 minutes. When she finished, the room was completely silent. Then Fitch stood and began his counter-presentation, and the second surprise of the morning arrived. "Your Honor," Fitch said, with the smooth confidence of a man delivering a prepared performance, "the respondent will demonstrate that this filing represents a personal campaign of harassment orchestrated by a woman acting without her husband's knowledge or authorization in pursuit of private grievances unrelated to the substance of the claims." "That will be sufficient, Mr. Fitch." Everyone looked up. Nathaniel had risen from the gallery. He was not supposed to speak. He was not a named party in the proceedings, only an interested observer. He spoke anyway, with the calm, absolute certainty of a man who has decided something and does not anticipate being argued with. "My wife acted with my full knowledge and authorization at every stage of this investigation," Nathaniel said. "I have documentation to that effect. If Mr. Fitch would like to pursue the line of argument that she did not, he will find himself demonstrating his client's desperation rather than his client's innocence." Fitch stared at him. The gallery did not stir, but the quality of its stillness changed. Judge Harlan looked at Nathaniel over the top of his spectacles. "Mr. Caldwell, you are not a named party in these proceedings." "No, sir," Nathaniel said. "I simply wanted to make the court aware of a factual error in opposing counsel's opening remarks before it proceeded further." He sat down. Harlan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Fitch. "You'll want to recalibrate your approach, Mr. Fitch." Fitch recalibrated. It was not an improvement. The hearing took 4.5 hours. Ruth Adkins testified for 38 minutes and did not waver once. Her voice was clear and her memory was precise, and when Fitch attempted to suggest that her husband's illness might have had causes unrelated to the well water, she looked at him with the steady, undamaged dignity of a woman who had nothing left to be afraid of and said, "Sir, I watched my husband die. I know what took him, and I will not stand here and pretend otherwise to make a guilty man's lawyer more comfortable." The gallery was entirely silent after that. The second family's testimony held. The third family's testimony held. The contamination records held. The falsified assessments laid side by side against Amelia's field documentation held. When Fitch tried to introduce the rumor about Harrington, Amelia rose quietly and said, "Your Honor, the petitioner filed a preemptive addendum addressing this specific claim 3 weeks ago. I'd ask the court to refer to that document rather than allow unsubstantiated rumor to occupy the court's time." Harlan referred to the document. The rumor was not introduced. At 1:30, Judge Harlan called a recess. Amelia sat at the petitioner's table and did not move. Nathaniel came through the bar and sat beside her, not behind it, beside it, in the seat that was technically reserved for legal counsel. No one stopped him. "You're doing exactly right," he said quietly. "Fitch is going to try to introduce the water quality report from the original county inspection. In the second session," she said, not looking up from her notes. "It's flawed, the methodology is sloppy, and I can demonstrate it. But he'll try to use it to contradict the contamination records." "How long will the demonstration take?" 4 minutes. 5 if the judge asks questions, he'll ask questions. Harlan always asks questions. Nathaniel paused. "Do you want me?" "No," she said. "I have it all right," he said. He stayed beside her through the recess. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The second session lasted 2 hours. Fitch introduced the flawed water quality report. Amelia demonstrated its methodological errors in 4 minutes and 40 seconds, with the composed precision of someone who had been anticipating this exact moment since February. When she finished, 3 members of the gallery farmers who understood water and soil and what contamination looked like were nodding. Judge Harlan asked 6 questions. She answered all 6. At 3:30, Harlan called the presentations closed and said he would deliver his findings in writing within 14 days. He looked over the courtroom with the expression of a man who has already made up his mind, but has a process to follow. "I'll note for the record," he said, removing his spectacles, "that the quality of the petitioner's documentation is among the most thorough this court has received in a county matter in some years." He paused. "The parties will be notified of findings in due course." He rose. The room rose. And then something happened that Amelia had not expected and that she would think about for a long time afterward. Ruth Adkins stood up in the gallery and started clapping. Not performatively, not with the theatrical energy of a crowd following a cue. She just stood up and brought her hands together, slowly and deliberately, the way someone does when they mean it more than they know how to say. And then the woman beside her stood and the man behind her. And within 30 seconds, half the gallery was on its feet, not in the frenzied way of a crowd that has been whipped up, but in the quiet way of people who have been holding something for a long time and have just been given permission to set it down. Amelia sat at the petitioner's table and looked at the floor and tried, with incomplete success, to keep her face composed. She felt a hand on her shoulder, Nathaniel's, brief and warm and steady. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They drove home in the late afternoon, the light going gold and low over the fields, and the silence between them was not the silence she had known for 3 years, the silence of 2 people in the same house, with nothing between them. It was different, fuller. The silence of 2 people who have just been through something together and are still inside it. They were a mile from the estate when Nathaniel said, without looking away from the road, "I need to tell you something." Amelia waited. 3 years ago, he said, "when we married, I told myself I was honoring an obligation. That I was doing the right thing by both families. That the arrangement would be workable. That it didn't need to be more than that." He paused. "I told myself that what I had felt for Helena was love, and that nothing else would come close, and that this was simply the practical way forward." He stopped. She waited. "I was wrong," he said, "about almost all of it. What I felt for Helena was admiration, anticipation. The idea of a person, not the person. I never had the chance to know her the way." He stopped again. His hands were steady on the reins, but his voice was working hard. "I have spent 3 years in the same house as you, Amelia. I have watched you build something from nothing. I have watched you fight for people I had ignored. I have watched you outmaneuver a man who threatened you, outperform a lawyer from Richmond, and hold a grieving woman's hand without making it about yourself. He finally looked at her. And I understand now that what I told myself was love for Helena, for the idea of what that marriage was supposed to be was a fraction of what is possible. And I wasted 3 years proving it to both of us. The road was quiet. The light was going. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. Do you know what I wanted most? She said. In 3 years of this marriage. Do you know what I actually wanted? Tell me. I wanted you to come to dinner and ask me what I thought about something. She held his gaze. Not the household. Not the accounts. Something that mattered to you. I wanted you to want my opinion. That was it. That was the whole of it. A pause. I didn't want grand gestures. I didn't want declarations. I wanted you to look at me like my mind was worth something to you. He was quiet. You were looking at me tonight, she said. In the courtroom. Every time I spoke, you were looking at me. Yes, he said. That, she said, is what I wanted. The silence that came after that was different again, warmer, weighted with something that neither of them was quite ready to name, and both of them could feel. He did not reach for her hand. She did not reach for his. But when the estate came into view, and the lights were on in the windows, and Cook had clearly anticipated their return because there was smoke from the kitchen chimney and a lamp burning in the front hall, Nathaniel brought the horses to a stop and sat for a moment before getting down, and he said quietly, to the air in front of him, I am going to spend a considerable amount of time making up for what I got wrong. I know, Amelia said. I don't expect you to make it easy. I won't, she said. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth moved in the way it had begun to do the almost smile that was more honest than the real one she had spent 3 years trying to earn. Good, he said. He got down and came around and offered her his hand. She took it, not because she needed the help, because she chose to. And that, she understood, as her feet touched the ground and she straightened and looked at the house that was starting slowly, carefully, with clear eyes and no illusions to feel like it might actually be hers, was the only kind of choosing that had ever meant anything. The circuit court findings would come in 14 days. They would be decisive, but that was not what she was thinking about as she walked through the front door of the Caldwell estate, with her husband's hand still warm around hers. She was thinking that she had walked into a courtroom that morning as Amelia Whitaker and had made a room full of people believe in what she knew to be true, and that the woman who had stood outside a study door, hoping to be noticed, had been replaced, somewhere in the last 8 months, by someone considerably harder to overlook. She was thinking that she had done that herself. And no one, not Nathaniel's change of heart, not the gallery's applause, not the almost smile that was starting to feel like something she'd earned rather than begged for, none of it would have meant anything if she had not. First and most importantly, stopped waiting for permission to become it. Judge Harlan's findings arrived on a Friday morning, 14 days exactly after the hearing. Delivered by a county courier who handed the sealed envelope to Thomas at the front door with the particular care of someone who understood he was carrying something consequential. Thomas brought it directly to Amelia, not to Nathaniel. To Amelia. She was in her sitting room when he knocked, working through the estate's winter supply accounts, and she looked at the envelope in Thomas's hands and felt her heart do one hard, distinct beat before settling. Thank you, Thomas, she said. She waited until he left before she opened it. She read it once. Then she set it flat on the table and pressed both palms against it and breathed for a moment the way she had learned to do when something moved through her that was too large to hold all at once. Then she picked it up and carried it to Nathaniel's study. He was at his desk. He looked up when she came in, read her face the way he had learned to, and was already rising before she reached him. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it. She watched his face, the controlled stillness, then the single hard exhale through his nose that was, she had learned, the closest Nathaniel Caldwell came to visible relief. Garrett is to make full restitution to all affected tenant families, he said, reading aloud. 5 years of inflated rents, returned with interest. The county is to conduct a full inspection and remediation of all affected properties at no cost to the tenants. Silas Pruitt is suspended pending a separate investigation into his handling of the original complaints. He lowered the letter. And Garrett is barred from holding any position of authority in the county for a period of not less than 10 years. Yes, Amelia said. He set the letter on his desk and looked at her. You won. We won, she said. No. He shook his head, and there was something in his voice she had not heard there before, something stripped of its usual management, something direct and undefended. No, Amelia. You built this. You carried this for 8 months alone. You stood in front of that courtroom and made it happen. He held her gaze. This was you. She looked at him for a long moment. Tell Ruth Adkins, she said finally. That's the part that matters. He nodded. She turned to go. Amelia, she stopped. Stay, he said. Please. The word please landed differently than anything else he had said to her in 3 years of marriage. Not a command, not a request from a man accustomed to being accommodated. A genuine ask, from someone who understood he might be told no. She turned back. She sat in the chair across from his desk. Talk to me, he said. Tell me what you want to do next. And so she did. Ruth Adkins heard the news that same afternoon, delivered by Amelia in person at the small farmhouse on the northern quarter that still had a roof that needed replacing and a well that had already been scheduled for remediation by the county. Ruth stood in her kitchen doorway and listened, and when Amelia finished, Ruth said nothing for a long moment, and then her face did something complicated and private that Amelia did not try to interpret. Because some things were not meant to be witnessed directly. My husband knew, Ruth said finally. He always said the truth would come out eventually. He didn't make it long enough to see it. I know, Amelia said. But someone fought for it anyway. Ruth looked at her. Someone who didn't have to. Everyone had to, Amelia said. We just hadn't found each other yet. Ruth reached out and took her hand, briefly, firmly, the way women who don't have spare words use their hands instead. Amelia drove back to the estate in the fading afternoon and allowed herself, for the duration of that drive and no longer, to feel the full weight of what the last 8 months had cost her. The sleepless nights, the careful grinding work of building a case that could not afford a single weak link. The weeks of being talked about in town, of being the subject of stories she hadn't written and couldn't fully correct. The strange loneliness of knowing she was right and not yet being believed. By the time she pulled up to the estate, she had put it away. She had things to do. The restitution process took 6 weeks to begin formally, and in those 6 weeks the county rearranged itself in the way counties do when a fixed point shifts slowly, visibly. With a great deal of noise from the people most invested in the old arrangement, and a quiet, steady momentum from everyone else. Garrett left. His wife left with him, and the house they had occupied on the edge of town stood empty, and no one spoke of them with particular warmth. Pruitt's investigation expanded, and within 3 weeks it had pulled in 2 additional clerks and a question about a land dispute from 7 years ago that had always seemed slightly irregular. The county magistrate, faced with scrutiny he had not anticipated, began cooperating with the circuit court's inquiry with an eagerness that told everyone exactly how frightened he was. Elliot Harrington finalized the commercial partnership with the Caldwell estate on a Tuesday morning in December, and this time Nathaniel was present for the full meeting. He sat across from Harrington and conducted himself with the professional correctness of a man who has privately resolved something and is no longer unsettled by the thing that unsettled him. When the terms were signed, Harrington shook hands with both of them and said, looking between them, I think this is going to be a productive relationship all around. And there was something in his tone that said he was not only talking about commerce. After he left, Nathaniel said, without particular inflection, he's a good man. Yes, Amelia agreed. He paused. I was not at my best when he first came to the estate. No, she agreed again. He looked at her sideways. You're not going to make this easy. I told you I wouldn't." "So you did." He picked up his copy of the signed terms. "I'm going to go over these again tonight. The third clause has language I want to revisit." "Page 4, she said. "The delivery timeline. I noticed it, too." He paused, looked at her. "Of course you did." She almost smiled. He almost smiled back. They were getting better at this. The letter arrived from Helena's mother on a Thursday in the third week of December, and it was this, not the court case, not the restitution, not even the slow, careful shift in her marriage that brought everything Amelia had been managing for 3 years to a sudden, complete crisis. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately. Mrs. Whitmore, Helena's mother, Amelia's own aunt by marriage, the woman who had sat at the bedside when Helena died and who had never, in 3 years, written to Amelia directly. All correspondence between the families had gone through Nathaniel. The fact that this letter was addressed to Amelia alone, in handwriting that was not steady, was enough to make her stand in the hallway for a full 30 seconds before opening it. She read it there, standing up, because she knew instinctively that she would not want to be sitting down. The letter was 4 pages long, and it said, among other things, that Mrs. Whitmore was dying cancer, the doctor said, moving fast. She had perhaps 3 months. It said that she had kept something from both families for 3 years, and that her conscience would not allow her to take it to her grave. It said that Helena had not wanted to marry Nathaniel Caldwell. She read that line 3 times. Helena had not wanted to marry Nathaniel Caldwell. She had been too afraid of her father to refuse outright, and too proud to ask for help, and she had spent the last year of her life finding private ways to make the arrangement delay. The fever that took her in March had not changed what was already becoming apparent to Helena alone, that she would have found a way out of the contract eventually, one way or another. She had told her mother this in February, 6 weeks before her death. She had been, Mrs. Whitmore wrote, already in love with someone else. A schoolteacher, a man with no money and no name, a man whose entire fortune was the way he looked at her daughter, like she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. Helena had been going to refuse the Caldwell contract. She had died before she could. Amelia stood in the hallway and read to the end of the letter. Then she stood there for a long time doing nothing, which was not something she did. What she was feeling was not simple enough to name quickly. It moved through her in layers, grief for a sister she had spent 3 years competing with in her own mind, a strange, belated tenderness for Helena, who had apparently been as trapped as Amelia and had simply run out of time before she could fight free, a complex rearrangement of the story she had been telling herself about Nathaniel, about Helena, about the whole architecture of how she had come to be standing in this hallway. And underneath all of it, something that felt, uncomfortably, like relief. Not because Helena was gone, never that, but because the ghost she had been competing with, the perfect, beloved Helena who had been everything Amelia wasn't, had just become, in 4 handwritten pages, a real person. A woman who had been afraid, and trapped, and in love with someone her family would not have accepted, and who had been protecting that love and that fear right up until the end. Amelia had not been losing to an ideal. She had been competing with a fiction. She went to find Nathaniel. He was in the stable yard, talking to one of the handlers about the winter feed arrangements. He saw her coming and registered her expression, and ended the conversation in 3 words and walked toward her. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the letter. She watched him read it. She watched his face do things she should never seen it do, not the controlled stillness, not managed in composure, but something that moved underneath all of that, like weather moving under ice. His jaw tightened, his eyes moved fast across the page. He read the whole thing standing up, the same way she had, and when he finished, he stood with the letter at his side and looked at the ground for a long time. "She didn't want it," he said. "Not to Amelia."
To him.
"Working through it." "No," Amelia said. 3 years I spent—" He stopped. 3 years I believed that I had failed her, that she had died before I could give her the life she deserved. that the least I could do was honor what the families had built. His voice was controlled but only barely. And she never wanted it. She was afraid, Amelia said carefully. She was 20 years old, and she was afraid of her father, and she was in love with someone she couldn't tell anyone about. That's not nothing, Nathaniel. That's not a small thing. No, he looked up. But I spent 3 years grieving a love that was never, that she never. He stopped again. Something moved through his face. I made you pay for it. For 3 years. I made you live inside a story that wasn't even true. You didn't know it wasn't true. That is not the point. His voice had an edge now, not at her. She understood, but at himself, at the full weight of it finally landing, without the cushioning of the version he had believed. I chose not to see you. I chose to look at what I'd lost instead of what was standing directly in front of me. Helena's choice or no Helena's choice, that was mine. Amelia looked at him. She had prepared, over the past months, for many versions of this conversation, for the slow reckoning, for the incremental acknowledgement, for the careful, managed progress of a proud man arriving at accountability in stages. She had not prepared for this, for the undefended rawness of it, for the specific look on his face, which was not performance, and was not management, and was not the expression of a man trying to say the right thing. It was the look of a man who had just had the story he organized his entire interior life around pulled out from under him, and was standing in the wreckage of it, and was not trying to hide that from her. Nathaniel, I am sorry. He said it looking directly at her, and the quality of it was nothing like the apology in the garden weeks ago, careful, considered, preliminary. This was bone deep. This was the real thing, not for marrying you. I am not sorry for that. I am sorry for what I did with it. For what I cost you. For 3 years of making you feel like you were asking for something unreasonable when all you wanted was to be seen. His voice was rough at the edges. You deserved better than what I gave you. From the first day. You deserved better, and I had it to give, and I chose not to. The yard was completely quiet. Amelia stood with Helena's mother's letter in her hands and looked at her husband and felt something that had been braced for a long time, slowly, carefully begin to release. I know, she said, and this time those 2 words meant something entirely different than they had in his study weeks ago. Not I know and I don't forgive you. Not I know and I'm done. Something harder to say and more dangerous to mean. I know, and I am still here. He looked at her. I am not forgiving 3 years in one conversation, she said clearly. That's not how this works. But I am still here, Nathaniel. And I am paying attention. And I need you to understand that means something, coming from me, because I do not stay anywhere I am not choosing to stay. I understand, he said. Do you? Yes, he held her gaze. You are the most deliberate person I have ever met. Everything you do is chosen, which means, he stopped, and something crossed his face that was new, something that was not certainty, not the composure of a man who knows his position, but the specific, uncertain openness of someone who is hoping for something he is not sure he has earned. Which means if you're still here, it means something I don't take lightly. Good, she said. Don't, she handed him back the letter. Write to Mrs. Whitmore, she said. She's dying, and she did a brave thing sending this. She deserves a reply. I will, he said. She turned to go. Amelia, she stopped but didn't turn. What do you want, he said. Not from the estate, not from the case, from this. From us. What do you actually want? She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and looked at him, and her voice when she spoke was careful and honest, and gave nothing more than she intended. I want a partner, she said, not someone who tolerates me. Not someone who manages me. I want someone who sits across from me at midnight because he is genuinely interested in what I'm building. I want someone who disagrees with me when he thinks I'm wrong and trusts me when I tell him I'm right. She paused. I want to be chosen, not because the contract says so. Not because I'm the available option, because you looked and you decided and you chose. He absorbed that. That is what I intend to give you, he said. Intend isn't the same as do, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. He took one step toward her. Then let me start doing. She looked at him for a long moment, this man she had married in a cedar-smelling church with no expectation of love, who had ignored her for 3 years with the particular obliviousness of someone who never imagined there was anything to notice, who had watched her fight for his tenants and argue before a circuit court and outmaneuver a conspiracy while he was still catching up to who she was, and she made a decision. Not to trust him completely, not yet. Not to forgive everything. Not all at once, but to allow this to be what it was becoming. Come to dinner tonight, she said, and tell me something you've been thinking about. Something that matters to you. Not business. Something real. He blinked. It was such a small request, such an ordinary human thing. All right, he said. And look at me when you talk, she said. Not past me. Yes, he said, I can do that. She left him in the yard. She was halfway back to the house when she heard him say something to the stable handler, in a voice that had an entirely different quality than it had 20 minutes ago, lighter, somehow, like a man who has set something down. She did not look back, but she was almost smiling. Dinner that night was not remarkable by any external measure. The food was the same. The table was the same. The candles burned at the same height they always did. What was different was that Nathaniel talked, not about the estate, not about the commercial accounts or the circuit court findings or the winter supply arrangements. He talked about his father, about the specific, suffocating pressure of inheriting a name that had its own expectations built into it, about the years he had spent organizing himself around what the Caldwell estate required of him, rather than what he himself wanted. About how early he had learned to confuse discipline with feeling nothing. He talked for 30 minutes without her asking a follow-up question, which told her he had needed to say it for a long time and had not previously had anyone to say it to. She asked one question when he paused. Did you ever want something different? Before the arrangement with Helena? Before all of it. Did you ever want something that was just yours? He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. I wanted to study law, he said, not practice it necessarily. Just understand it. The way it works, the way it moves, the way argument becomes structure. He looked at her. I gave it up at 20 because there was the estate to manage, and my father was not well and there was no one else. She looked at him. You understood what I was doing in that courtroom. Every word of it, he said. I kept thinking she's built this the way a lawyer builds a case. The sequencing, the evidence hierarchy, the way she anticipated counter-arguments before they were made. He paused. You would have been very good at it. So would you, she said. He looked at her directly and said nothing, and the silence was not the silence of their marriage as it had been, empty, careful, maintained, but the silence of two people sitting inside something they were building together. Testing its weight, finding it stronger than expected. I want to do something, Amelia said, with the restitution process. After the remediations are complete and the families are stabilized. She turned her glass slowly. The children in the northern quarter have no proper schooling. The closest school is 8 miles. Most of them never go. She looked at him. I want to establish a school. On Caldwell land. A real one, with a proper teacher and proper materials, and no requirement that families pay for it. He looked at her for a long moment. That will cost money, he said. Yes, she agreed, and it will take time to build. Yes, and the county will have opinions about a woman establishing a school on private land, he said. The county, she said, has had opinions about me for 3 years, and I am still here. Something genuine moved through his face, not the almost smile this time, the real one. The one she had watched him give Clara Beaumont across a ballroom, what felt like a lifetime ago, the one she had believed she could never earn. He was giving it to her now. Then we build a school, he said. Not I'll consider it. Not we'll see we. She felt that word settle somewhere in her chest, like something finally finding the place it was meant to be. Good, she said. I already have a teacher in mind. He laughed, a short, surprised sound that was entirely unguarded, and she realized she had never heard him laugh like that before. Not the polite social laugh he deployed at parties. This was real. Of course you do, he said. Her name is Miss Eleanor Marsh. She's been tutoring the rector's children for 4 years, and she's been underpaid for every one of them. I've already spoken with her. You've already— He stopped. Shook his head. When did you have this conversation? 3 weeks ago, she said. I wanted to make sure she was interested before I raised it with you. He looked at her with an expression that she was learning to read accurately, that particular mixture of exasperation and profound, undisguised admiration that he had stopped trying to conceal somewhere around the 3rd week of the investigation. Amelia, he said, yes, is there a single thing you do not already have 3 steps planned for? She considered this seriously. Not many, she said. He shook his head again, and the smile didn't leave his face, and she let herself look at it directly, without the guarding she had spent 3 years perfecting, and let herself feel what she felt. It was not uncomplicated. It was not without history and damage, and the careful weight of everything it had cost to get here. It was not the easy, uncomplicated love of a woman who had simply been given something freely. It was something better. It was the love of a woman who had built herself first, and chosen afterward, with clear eyes and no illusions and the specific, hard-won knowledge that she was worth the choosing. She was not healed yet. He was not changed overnight. There were still days ahead that would require more than either of them had easily given, and she knew it, and he knew it too. But they were sitting at the same table, talking about something real, and he was looking at her. After all of it, after 3 years of looking through her like glass, he was finally properly looking at her. That was enough. For tonight, that was entirely enough. 3 days later, Amelia received a second letter. Not from Mrs. Whitmore this time. From the county magistrate's office, a formal acknowledgement of her contribution to the Pruitt investigation, written in the careful, official language of men who were not accustomed to acknowledging contributions from women and were doing their best with it. She read it once, then placed it in the folder where she kept the things that mattered, alongside Ruth Adkins' testimony and the circuit court findings and the notarized letters she had prepared 3 weeks before the trial. Thomas knocked. Mr. Harrington is here, ma'am. He says he has something for you. He wouldn't leave it with me. She went to the front parlor. Harrington was standing near the window with a large, flat-wrapped package under his arm and the expression of a man on a specific and somewhat solemn errand. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, I won't take much of your time. I wanted to give you this directly. He set the package on the table and stepped back. She unwrapped it. It was a framed document, beautifully lettered, official-looking with a county seal at the bottom. She read it, and then she read it again. It was a formal recognition, signed by 3 county businessmen and Harrington himself, of Amelia Whittaker Caldwell's contribution to the establishment of fair commercial and agricultural practices in the county. It was the kind of document that men gave each other at dinners, the kind that hung on study walls and said, without requiring a single additional word, that the person it named was someone of account. It had her name on it, not Nathaniel Caldwell's wife. Not the Caldwell estate, her name. She stood very still for a moment. Harrington, she said, ma'am, this was your idea. Several of us agreed it was overdue, he said simply. You won a case that protects 14 families. You exposed a conspiracy that had been running for 5 years. You did it through 8 months of careful, rigorous work that would have impressed any lawyer or magistrate in this state. He looked at her directly. That deserves to be on record, somewhere other than a court filing. She looked at the document. She thought about the woman who had stood beside a fireplace at a party, watching her husband smile at someone else, holding a glass of lemonade she hadn't touched, telling herself that if she was patient enough and kind enough and useful enough, eventually someone would see her. Somebody saw her now, not because she had been patient. Not because she had made herself small enough to be unthreatening, or useful enough to be indispensable, or gracious enough to deserve it. Because she had stopped waiting to be seen and had simply become impossible to overlook. "Thank you," she said, and her voice for once did not sound careful. It sounded like itself. Harrington nodded, shook her hand, and left. She stood in the parlor with the framed document in her hands, and when Nathaniel came in from the hallway, he had seen Harrington arrive and had given her the time, which was its own kind of recognition. She held it up and let him read it without commentary. He read it. He looked at her. "Where do you want to hang it?" he said. She thought about it. "My sitting room," she said. "Above the main study." "No," she said. "That room is mine." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." And they stood together in the front parlor of the Caldwell estate, with the December light coming through the windows and the document that bore her name held between them. And there was nothing dramatic about the moment, nothing performed or orchestrated. There was only this: a woman who had rebuilt herself piece by careful piece, standing in a house that was finally, truly hers, next to a man who was finally, genuinely trying to deserve her. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something rarer and more durable. It was a beginning that had been honestly earned. The school was finished on the first Monday of March, and Amelia was there before anyone else. She arrived in the early gray of the morning, before Miss Eleanor Marsh, before the first families, before Nathaniel, who had been up late reviewing the final construction details, and had fallen asleep at his desk in the way he sometimes did now, documents spread around him, lamp burned low. The particular exhaustion of a man who had decided that working hard at something real was preferable to the careful, managed idleness he had maintained for years. She had covered him with his coat and left him there, and gone to the school alone, because she needed to stand in it by herself first, before it became something shared. She stood in the center of the single large room and looked at the rows of benches, the writing slates stacked neatly at the front, the stove that would keep the room warm through the tail end of winter, the window that faced east so the morning light would come in directly over the children's work. She had designed every detail of this room. She had argued with the builder about the window placement. She had ordered the slates herself from a supplier in Richmond that Harrington had recommended. She had written the charter that established the school as a permanent institution on Caldwell land, protected by the circuit court filing, which meant it could not be dismantled by any future estate owner without a legal proceeding. She had made it permanent on purpose, because she understood, in the way she had come to understand most important things through hard experience rather than instruction, that anything worth building needed to be built so it could survive the builder. She was still standing there when she heard boots on the step and turned to find Nathaniel in the doorway. He was still in yesterday's clothes. He had clearly woken at his desk, registered her absence, and come directly here without stopping to change, which was so unlike him that she almost smiled. "You left early," he said. "I wanted to see it alone first." He came in. He looked around the room, the way she should, taking in the benches, the slates, the window, and was quiet for a moment. "It's good," he said, simply, without embellishment, because he had learned that she trusted plain honesty more than elaborate praise. "Yes," she agreed. He stood beside her, not too close, not managed distance, just beside her, which was where he had been in the ways that mattered for the past 3 months. Present, paying attention, choosing it every day with the deliberate consistency of a man who understood that choosing once was not enough, and that she was watching to see whether he understood that. He understood it. 31 children enrolled, she said. As of yesterday. Miss Marsh thinks we'll have 40 by summer when the families in the outer quarter hear it's real. "It's real," Nathaniel said. "It is now," she said. He looked at her sideways. "It was real when you decided it would be." She let that sit. He wasn't wrong. The first family arrived 20 minutes later. The Adkins boy, Ruth's grandson, 7 years old, brought by his mother with his hair combed flat and his face scrubbed to a shine and an expression of tremendous, barely contained excitement that he was working very hard to make look like calm. His mother, A young woman named Clara, not the Clara of the ballroom. A different Clara. Attired and quietly hopeful, Clara brought him to the door and looked at Amelia with particular expression of women who have been given something they were not certain they deserved. "Thank you," Clara said. "For just. Thank you. Bring him back tomorrow," Amelia said. And the day after, "Yes, ma'am," the boy went in. Clara went home. And by 9 o'clock there were 27 children in the room, and Miss Eleanor Marsh was standing at the front of them with the composed authority of a woman who had been waiting 4 years for a room worthy of what she actually was. And she looked at Amelia once across the heads of the children with an expression that said everything it needed to. Nathaniel stood in the back. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The county's response to the school was predictably divided. The families whose children attended thought it was the finest thing that had happened in the Northern Quarter in a generation. The county's more established residents had opinions ranging from cautious approval to the sort of carefully phrased objection that meant exactly what it said while pretending to mean something more respectable. Margaret Holloway, who had apparently survived Amelia's dismissal of her from the parlor with her social instincts intact if not entirely undamaged, was heard to remark at a Thursday gathering that it was a lovely gesture, of course, though one did wonder if a woman without children of her own was quite the right person to be making decisions about other people's children's education. This comment was reported back to Amelia by Polly, who had developed over the past months an informal intelligence network of considerable efficiency. "What would you like me to do, ma'am?" Polly asked. "Nothing," Amelia said. "Let her say it. You're not going to Margaret Holloway's opinion of my qualifications," Amelia said pleasantly, "has not been relevant to anything I've done in the past 6 months. I see no reason to start caring about it now." Polly grinned. It was the grin of someone who had watched a transformation and was deeply satisfied by it. "Yes, ma'am," she said. What Amelia did not say, because it was not Polly's business, was that Margaret Holloway's comment had landed somewhere tender. Not because it was true it was not, but because it reached for the one thing that Amelia had not yet resolved in herself. The question of what she wanted, not for the estate, not for the school, not for the tenant families or the legal fund she was quietly beginning to research, or the commercial partnership that was already generating returns. What she wanted for her own life, for herself, for the marriage that was becoming slowly and honestly something she had not anticipated when she placed a ring on a desk on a cold October night. She had not resolved it because she was not ready to. And she did not like being pushed toward resolutions she hadn't reached on her own timetable. She went back to work. The twist that no one had seen coming arrived on a Thursday afternoon in April, in the form of a man named Gerald Whitmore, Helena's brother. Mrs. Whitmore's only son. A man Amelia had met 3 times at family functions and remembered as quiet, a little formal, with the slightly compressed quality of someone who had grown up between a demanding father and an exceptional sister and had spent most of his life figuring out how to take up the correct amount of space. He came to the estate without announcement and asked to speak with both of them. They sat in the main parlor, Amelia and Nathaniel on one side, Gerald on the other, with the careful formality of people who are about to discuss something that matters and are not quite sure how to begin it. Gerald began it. "My mother died 2 weeks ago," he said. "We know," Amelia said. "We received word." "I'm sorry, Gerald." "Truly," he nodded, pressed his hands together. "She told me about the letter she sent you." Before she told me what was in it. He looked at Nathaniel. "About Helena." Nathaniel was very still. "Yes, I knew," Gerald said. "About the school teacher. About Helena not wanting the contract." He looked at his own hands. "I knew the whole time, and I said nothing because I was 22, and afraid of my father, and I told myself it wasn't my place." He looked up, and his eyes were the kind of tired that comes from carrying something for too long. "I have thought about that every day for 3 years." The room was quiet. "You couldn't have stopped it," Nathaniel said. "Not by yourself, not against your father." "No," Gerald said. "But I could have told the truth sooner. I could have told it when my mother wrote to you." He paused. I'm telling it now because she asked me to, and because he stopped. Restarted. Because I watched what you did, he said to Amelia. The case, the school. My mother told me about it before she died. She spent the last week she had reading everything she could find about what was happening in this county. A pause. She said you were extraordinary. Amelia felt something move through her that she kept carefully off her face. She was kind, she was accurate, Gerald said. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. He placed it on the table between them. My father left a will. The family estate in the Shenandoah, it was always meant to go to Helena first, and then to whoever she married. In absence of Helena, my father intended it to revert to me. He paused. But my mother changed her own will before she died. The portion that was hers, her personal inheritance, her mother's money, the things that were legally hers and not my father's, she left to you. He looked at Amelia. Specifically to you, not to the Caldwell estate. To Amelia Whitaker Caldwell, to use as she sees fit. The silence in the room was absolute. Amelia looked at the envelope. She did not reach for it. Why, she said. Because she said you were the daughter. She watched fight for what was right when no one asked her to. And she wanted to give you something back. Gerald's voice was steady, but only just. She said she owed you 3 years of being treated like a substitute, and that this was the only apology she had left to make. Nathaniel said nothing. He was looking at Amelia. She was looking at the envelope. She thought about Mrs. Whitmore, a woman she had never been particularly close to, a woman who had always seemed to look at her with a mixture of guilt and complicated grief that Amelia had never quite understood. She understood it now. She had been looking at the woman who had taken her daughter's place and was making a life of it with a grace that Mrs. Whitmore could not quite bring herself to acknowledge directly until she was dying. She reached out and picked up the envelope. Tell me what the terms are, she said to Gerald. He told her. It was enough money to endow the school permanently. Enough to fund the legal assistance program she had been sketching in her notebooks for 2 months. Enough to make everything she had been building independent of anyone's goodwill, including Nathaniel's, which was, and she recognized this with the clear-eyed honesty she applied to everything, the most important thing about it. She would never again need to depend on anyone's willingness to let her continue. She looked at Nathaniel. He looked back at her. His expression was not complicated. It was the expression of a man who understood exactly what this meant and was not threatened by it, which told her more about how far he had come than anything else he could have said or done. That's yours, he said completely. No argument from me. I know, she said. I wasn't asking, I know, he said. And the corner of his mouth moved. She turned back to Gerald. Thank you for bringing this yourself. You could have sent it through a solicitor. I know, he said. I wanted to see you. I wanted to see. He paused. My mother said you were remarkable. I wanted to see if she was right. And Amelia said. He almost smiled. The family resemblance to Helena, whom Amelia had known mostly through description and comparison, surfaced briefly in that almost smile. She was right, he said. He left an hour later with the careful lightness of a man who has put down a weight he should have set down years ago. That evening, Amelia sat in her sitting room with the envelope, and the documents inside it spread across her work table, and she did not work. She just sat. She let herself feel it, without managing it, the strangeness of being given something by a woman she had mourned, without quite knowing it. The strange completeness of Helena becoming in death, not a ghost to compete with, but a gift. A woman who had left, in the only way she could, something that would help the woman who came after her. Nathaniel knocked at 9:30. She let him in. He sat in the chair across from her, looked at the documents, looked at her face, and said, "How are you?" Not about the money, not about the endowment. How are you? The question he had started asking over the past months, simply and directly, and meant it. I don't entirely know yet, she said. That's all right, he said. She was 20 years old, Amelia said. Helena. She was 20 years old and afraid and in love with someone she couldn't have, and she died before she could fight free. She looked at her hands. I spent 3 years competing with her. I spent 3 years feeling like I was losing to her. And she was just a girl who was scared. Yes, Nathaniel said, I'm sad for her, Amelia said. Genuinely. I didn't expect to be. I thought I'd feel relief, maybe, or vindication. But mostly I just feel sad. So do I, he said. She looked at him. I spent 3 years grieving a love I'd imagined, he said. And none of it was real. And there's something very sad about that, too. Wasted grief for a fiction. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry I let it cost you what it did. You've apologized, she said. More than once. I'll keep apologizing until it stops feeling necessary, he said. She considered that. It's getting less necessary, she said. Gradually, something in his face eased. Good, he said. They sat together in the quiet of her sitting room, and Amelia thought about what she wanted to say and decided to say it, because she had stopped performing caution and was trying, carefully, to practice something more like honesty. I'm going to use the money for the school endowment and the legal fund, she said. And I want to put a portion aside independently. In my own name. Not because I don't trust you. She met his eyes. Because I need to know it's there. I need to know that everything I've built is mine, and stays mine, regardless of what happens. Yes, he said, without hesitation. She blinked. She had prepared arguments for this. She had expected resistance, or at minimum the particular careful reasonableness of a man who agrees in principle while suggesting modifications. Yes, she said. Yes, he repeated. It should be in your name. All of it. The school charter, the endowment, the legal fund, your personal account. He held her gaze. I should have arranged proper financial independence for you from the beginning of this marriage. The fact that I didn't was it was wrong, and I'm correcting it. He paused. I've already spoken with the solicitor. There's an account in your name. Whatever you want to put in it is yours, and no one, including me, requires your reason. She stared at him. When did you do that? She said. 3 weeks ago, he said. You arranged financial independence for me 3 weeks ago and didn't mention it. You were busy, he said, and I didn't want it to seem like I didn't want you to think I was trying to purchase something. She looked at him for a long, unguarded moment. Nathaniel, she said. Yes, that might be the most intelligent thing you've done in this marriage. He ducked his head briefly in a way that was almost humble and said, I'm learning. You are, she said. Faster than I expected. He looked up. Is that a compliment? It is, she said. Take it. And for the first time in 4 years of knowing this man, Amelia Whittaker Caldwell sat in her own room with her own work on the table in front of her, and her own money in an account in her own name, and she laughed. Not a polite social sound, a real one, surprised and genuine in hers. He laughed too. That real, unguarded laugh she had first heard months ago and had been cataloging ever since, adding it to the small, growing collection of things about him that were worth keeping. May brought the county's annual spring gathering, and for the first time in 4 years, Amelia arrived at it differently. She did not spend the morning calculating which dress would make her least visible. She did not rehearse conversations designed to take up exactly the right amount of space. She chose what she wanted to wear, which was a deep blue that she liked and that Nathaniel had said once, carefully, that he thought suited her. And she put it on and went downstairs and found him waiting at the bottom with an expression that told her everything she needed to know about how she looked. Ready? He said. Yes, she said. They arrived together, which they had always done technically, but this time together meant something different. He stayed with her, not hovering, not performing the attentive husband for the benefit of the room. Simply present, the way he was in her sitting room at midnight, the way he was at the kitchen table when she debriefed the tenant families, the way he had been in the front row of the circuit court. There, paying attention, choosing it. Margaret Holloway found her within the first 20 minutes, because Margaret Holloway found everyone within the first 20 minutes. Amelia, she said, with the particular warmth of a woman who has recalibrated. You look wonderful. And the school, I've been hearing such things. Such a meaningful contribution. Thank you, Amelia said. And the Whitmore inheritance, well, that was unexpected, wasn't it? Quite a gesture. She tilted her head. You must be very pleased. I'm very busy, Amelia said pleasantly. Which I find more satisfying than pleased. Margaret blinked. Readjusted. Well, yes, I imagine you do. She looked between Amelia and Nathaniel with an expression that was working very hard to look like genuine warmth. You two seem, she searched for the word, settled. We're getting there, Nathaniel said, from beside Amelia. He said it simply, without performance, and his hand came briefly to the small of Amelia's back, not possessively, not theatrically, just steady and warm in there. Amelia did not move away from it. Margaret, who missed very little, saw this. Something in her face shifted towards something that was actually genuinely, not entirely performance. Good, she said, and this time she meant it. She moved on. Harrington found them near the windows 20 minutes later, with the easy manner of a man who had decided some time ago that the Caldwells were worth his honest company. The first quarter returns on the partnership, he said to Amelia, shaking her hand. Considerably better than projected. You were right about the Southern trade timing. I usually am, she said. He laughed. Nathaniel, beside her, looked like a man who was proud of something he had not built himself, which was a specific and honest species of pride that she had not seen in him before this year. There's a Merchants Association meeting in Richmond in June, Harrington said. 3 of the county's larger landowners are attending to discuss the regional trade terms. I think you should come. He looked at her directly. Not as a representative of the Caldwell estate, as yourself. Your own record speaks for itself at this point, and there are people in Richmond who've heard about the circuit court case and want to meet the woman who built it. Amelia looked at him. In Richmond, she said. Yes. As myself, as Amelia Whittaker Caldwell, he said. Who happens to be one of the most effective people I've done business with in 6 years of doing business in this state. She was quiet for a moment. I'll be there, she said. Nathaniel beside her said nothing, but his hand, still at the small of her back, pressed once brief and warm and full of something she had learned, over these months, to translate accurately. He was proud of her, not for reflecting well on the estate, not for doing something that benefited him, proud of her, for herself, for the thing she had built and the person she had become. She let herself feel it without deflecting it. That, too, was something she was practicing. The night before the Richmond trip, Amelia sat at her work table, long after she should have slept, and found herself looking at the framed document. Harrington had brought her in December the formal recognition, signed by 4 men, that hung above her desk with her name in proper letters at the top. She had looked at it dozens of times, but tonight she looked at it differently, because she was about to walk into a room in Richmond and represent herself, and she wanted to understand what she was bringing with her. She was bringing 8 months of documentation and a circuit court victory. She was bringing a school with 37 children currently enrolled. She was bringing a legal fund that had already helped 2 families in the Northern Quarter navigate property disputes. She was bringing a commercial partnership that was returning better than projected. She was bringing the knowledge, hard and honest and completely hers, that she had built every single one of these things from the inside of a situation that had given her nothing to start with except her own mind and her own will. She was bringing Amelia Whittaker Caldwell, who had walked into this county 3 years ago as a replacement and was leaving for Richmond as something the county was still learning to name correctly. A knock at the door, Nathaniel. He came in, looked at her, looked at the document on the wall, and sat down across from her without being asked. You're not sleeping, he said. No. Nervous? She considered lying. Decided against it. A little. Good, he said. It means you understand what's at stake. She looked at him. You're not going to tell me I have nothing to be nervous about? You have things to be nervous about, he said. Richmond is a different room than the county circuit court. The men there are more practiced, more connected, less likely to be moved by anything except evidence and delivery. And you'll be the only woman in the room. He held her gaze. But you've been the only woman in every room you've walked into this year, and you have not once been the least qualified person there. She absorbed that. What do I do when they look at me, the way men look at you when they haven't decided what you are yet? She said. You look back, he said. You don't explain yourself. You don't justify being there. You simply conduct yourself as someone who belongs in the room and let them catch up. He paused. You already know how to do this. You did it in Judge Harlan's court. Harlan knew me, she said. Richmond doesn't. Richmond will, he said. After tomorrow, she looked at him for a long moment. You have very complete confidence in me. Yes, he said. I do, entirely. Even when I don't. Especially when you don't, he said. That's what this is for. He gestured between them, simply without drama. You hold mine when I need it. I hold yours when you need it. That's how this works. She sat with that. That's not how it used to work, she said. No, he said, I'm aware you held nothing for 3 years. I know, his voice was steady and accountable. I'm making up for it. I intend to keep doing that. It's working, she said quietly. For what it's worth. It's working. He said nothing, but the look on his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, and she did not look away from it because she had spent too long looking away from things that mattered. Go to sleep, he said, finally. Come back tomorrow, she said. He paused at the door, looked at her over his shoulder. I'm not going anywhere. I know, she said. I'm saying, come back after I'm done. I want to tell you how it went. He turned. Something moved through his face, simple, real, not managed. I'll be here, he said. She went to sleep. She slept soundly, which was its own kind of answer. Richmond was everything Harrington had said it would be: a larger room, more practiced men, the particular Cool's assessment of people who did not give the benefit of the doubt until it had been earned directly in front of them. Amelia walked in and did exactly what Nathaniel had told her to do. She looked back. She did not explain herself. She did not justify being there. She conducted herself as someone who belonged in the room. It took 20 minutes before the first man stopped looking at her sideways and started listening to what she was actually saying. It took 40 before 3 of them were directing questions specifically to her. It took 2 hours before the meeting's moderator, a gray-haired merchant named Patterson, who had the manner of a man who had been underestimating people for decades and had mostly gotten away with it, said directly across the table, Mrs. Caldwell, your analysis of the Southern trade timing is the most useful thing anyone has said in this room today. Thank you, she said. How long have you been managing commercial accounts? Actively 18 months, she said. But I've been studying them for rather longer. We should have more women in these meetings, he said. Not as a compliment exactly, as a fact he had just arrived at and was stating before he changed his mind. Yes, she said, you should. She came home at 7 in the evening. Nathaniel was in the front hall when she came through the door, and he looked at her face and read it correctly in the way he had learned to. Tell me, he said. She told him. All of it: Patterson's comment, the shift in the room, the 3 follow-up conversations she'd had over the late meal. She talked for 20 minutes without stopping, and he listened to every word with complete attention, asking 2 questions that were exactly the right questions. And when she finished, he said, When's the next meeting? September, she said. You'll go back. Of course I'll go back. He smiled, the real smile, the one she had earned. Good, he said. Summer moved through the estate the way good things do, quietly, with the particular texture of something that has found its right shape. The school grew to 43 children. The legal fund completed its first successful case, helping a family in the Outer Quarter challenge an illegal land reassessment that had been sitting uncontested for 8 years. The commercial partnership returned its second quarter with returns that made even Nathaniel raise his eyebrows appreciatively. And Amelia and Nathaniel continued the quiet, daily, deliberate work of building a marriage that had not existed before. it was not without difficulty. There were days when the history of what they had lost in 3 years of distance settled between them, like weather days when she was tired and did not want to explain herself. Days when he defaulted to the controlled composure he had spent a lifetime building, and she had to decide whether to push through it or let it go. There were disagreements that were real disagreements, not managed compromises, and they learned to have those without one person capitulating to keep the peace, which was harder than it sounded, and more important than almost anything else. There was the morning in July when he came to her sitting room and said, "I've been thinking about Helena," and she put down her pen and said, "Tell me." And he talked for an hour about what it felt like to understand that 3 years of grief had been built on a misreading, about the strange guilt of realizing he had caused damage to a real person in honor of something that was never what he thought it was. She listened. She did not comfort him too quickly. She let him sit in it, because it needed to be sat in, and when he finished she said, "You love the idea of what she could have been. That's not nothing, but it's also not a reason to spend the rest of your life apologizing to me. Do the better thing. That's enough." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are considerably wiser than I deserve," he said. "Yes," she agreed, "but you're catching up." There was the evening in August when Margaret Holloway inevitably appeared at the estate, requesting to know whether Mrs. Caldwell would consider sitting on the county's newly formed education committee, and Amelia, who had spent 3 years being talked about by this woman, looked at her across the parlor and said yes, on the condition that the committee has actual authority to act on its recommendations, not just produce them. Margaret blinked. Yes, I believe that can be arranged." "Then yes," Amelia said, "I'll sit on it." Margaret left, looking slightly dazed. Cook, appearing from the hallway, said, "Well done, ma'am," with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting a long time for that specific moment. There was the afternoon in September when Ruth Adkins' grandson, the boy, with the combed flat hair, who had been among the first students at the school, brought Amelia a drawing he had made. It was a drawing of a house with a large window and children inside it, rendered in the particular earnest style of a 7-year-old who is working very hard. He held it out to her with the gravity of someone presenting something important. "It's the school," he said. "I can see that," she said. "It's very good. Miss Marsh said you made it happen," he said. "So I made you this." She took it. She looked at it for a moment. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He ran back to the schoolyard. She stood with the drawing in her hands and thought about the woman who had stood in a ballroom 3 years ago, holding a glass of lemonade she hadn't touched, watching her husband smile at someone else, telling herself to be patient and useful and small enough not to cause trouble. She looked at the drawing of the house with the large window and the children inside it. She was that woman anymore. The twist that arrived in October came from a direction no one had expected, and it changed everything in a way that was not dramatic so much as final, the kind of final that closes a door that has been standing open for too long. A letter arrived from a solicitor in Richmond, and it was addressed to Nathaniel, and it concerned a legal claim that Gerald Whitmore had filed. Not against the Caldwell estate, but against his own father's estate, a challenge to the original Whitmore will, on the grounds that Helena's portion had been promised to her by right of a private agreement, and that the reversion clause was therefore invalid. Gerald, it turned out, had spent the month since his mother's death doing his own version of what Amelia had done quietly, carefully building a case. Not against anyone, for something, for his sister's memory. For the principle that Helena Whitmore had had rights that were ignored in her lifetime, and that someone should say so on the record. He was not asking for money. He was asking the Richmond court to record, formally, that Helena Whitmore had been party to a marriage contract she did not consent to, and that the legal record of the Whitmore family estate should reflect this. He was asking for his sister's truth to exist in writing. Nathaniel sat with the letter for a long time. Then he called for his coat. "Where are you going?" Amelia asked. "Richmond," he said. "I'm going to testify in support of Gerald's claim." She looked at him. You don't have to, she said. It's not your fight. Yes, it is, he said. His voice was quiet and certain. I was part of what happened to Helena, not because I was cruel, but because I didn't ask. I accepted an arrangement without asking whether everyone in it had agreed. He met her eyes. I'm not going to let that stand unchallenged when I have the ability to challenge it. She held his gaze. When do you leave, she said. Tomorrow morning, he said. I'll be back by Friday. I'll have Thomas prepare the accounts you'll need to review when you return, she said. He looked at her. That's all you're going to say? That's all that needs saying, she said. Go do the right thing. He crossed the room and stood in front of her and looked at her for a moment with the full, undefended weight of everything he had come to be in this marriage, not the man who had looked through her like glass, not the man managing an obligation, but someone who had chosen her, carefully and repeatedly, and with clear eyes, and knew she had done the same. I'll be back Friday, he said. I'll be here, she said. He left the next morning. He was back Friday. Gerald's claim was upheld. Helena Whitmore's name appeared in the Richmond court record as a woman who had not consented, and the legal architecture of the original contract was annotated to reflect it. It would not bring her back. It would not undo anything. But it was true, and now it existed, and no one could pretend otherwise. Nathaniel came home and found Amelia in the school, working late with Miss Marsh on the winter curriculum. He stood in the doorway, and she looked up and saw something in his face that was clean and quiet and resolved. It's done, he said. I know, she said. Harrington heard from his Richmond contact this morning. He shook his head. Of course. She rose, said goodnight to Miss Marsh, and walked with him back across the estate. In the cool October evening the same month, she realized that she had placed a ring on his desk a year ago. 1 full year. 1 year, he said, as if reading it. Yes, she said. You've built a school, he said. A legal fund. A commercial partnership. A county education committee seat. And you testified before a circuit court in a case you built from nothing. He paused. In 1 year. We built most of it, she said. You built it, he said. I helped. There's a difference, and I know what it is. She looked at him. What are you going to build next, he said. She had been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it since Richmond, since Patterson's comment, since the drawing the Adkins boy had given her. She had been thinking about it in the particular way she thought about things she was ready to pursue quietly, steadily, with the focused attention of someone who had stopped asking for permission and started asking what was possible. I want to open the legal fund to women, she said. Not just tenant families. Women specifically. Women who are in situations like the one I was in, bound by contracts they didn't fully understand, without financial independence, without recourse. She looked at Nathaniel steadily. It will make some people uncomfortable. Most worthwhile things do, he said. It will require a lawyer willing to take cases on reduced payment. I have 3 names in mind, he said. I've been thinking about this too. She stopped walking. Looked at him. You've been thinking about this, she said. Since April, he said. When you mentioned it in passing and clearly thought I wasn't listening. He held her gaze. I'm always listening, Amelia. I know I gave you years of evidence to the contrary. But I'm listening now. She stood in the October evening looking at the man she had married in despair and had remade into someone she could love, and let herself feel the full, honest, uncomplicated weight of it. Not the love of a woman who had been given something easily. The love of a woman who had built herself first and chosen afterward, who had never begged and never performed and never made herself smaller to fit someone else's comfort. The love of someone who had placed a ring on a desk at midnight and walked out into her own life and refused to stop until it was entirely hers. All right, she said, then we build it. Yes, he said. We do. He offered her his arm. She took it, not because she needed it, because she wanted it, which was entirely different, and which was the whole point, that want and choose were the same thing when you were finally, truly, completely free. Years later, when people spoke of Amelia Whittaker Caldwell, They did not speak of her as the woman who had been the replacement bride, or the woman whose husband had once looked through her like glass, or the woman who had competed with a ghost for 3 years and been patient while she did it. Those stories existed, but they were not the ones that lasted. The ones that lasted were different. They spoke of the woman who had exposed a 5-year conspiracy on behalf of 14 families who had no one else to fight for them. The woman who had stood in a circuit courtroom and built a case so thoroughly that Judge Harlan had noted its quality in his formal findings. The woman who had established a school and a legal fund and sat on the county education committee and gone to Richmond made Pattersons say out loud that women should be in those rooms. They spoke of her as the woman who had taught a proud, closed man how to see, not because she had been patient, not because she had been gracious, not because she had waited long enough for him to come around, but because she had stopped waiting entirely and had become, in the space that waiting used to occupy, entirely and unmistakably herself. And when people saw Nathaniel Caldwell at her side, which was where he was, consistently without performance, they saw a man who selected the way Ruth Adkins had always said a man should look at a woman. Like she was the most capable person in the room, like he was grateful to be there, like he was choosing her every day and knew exactly what it cost and what it was worth. She had made sure of it, not by demanding it, not by begging for it, by being with complete and unwavering commitment exactly who she was until there was no version of his life in which he could honestly say he had not been given every opportunity to see it. He had seen it. He had chosen it. And Amelia Whitaker Caldwell, who had walked into this county as a replacement and had made herself into something the county was still, years later, finding adequate words to describe, had chosen him back not from need, not from absence of options, not from the exhausted resignation of a woman who had run out of fight, from strength, from clarity, from the specific hard-won freedom of a woman who knows her own worth and will accept nothing that does not meet it. The wedding ring she had placed on his desk on a cold October night had been returned to her finger 6 months later, not by him pressing it back on her hand with declarations, but by her picking it up herself and putting it on, in the morning, in her own sitting room, in front of the framed document with her name on it, because she had decided it meant something different now. Not obligation, not arrangement, not the imperfect gold band sized for another woman's hand. A choice, hers, and that entirely, completely, and without reservation was the only ending she had ever been willing to accept.